I've been letting it grow too much. It's all from a cutting about that size. I know this is counterproductive to growth. This is turning out to be a nice tree. Growing out bonsai trunks in the ground, this is the fastest way to develop a trunk. How do you go about it? Why sacrifice branches are not always a waste of time? We trimmed back some trees, we removed the sacrifice branch, we lifted the tree and showed how you can work on the Nebari in the middle of winter and how you create a nice smooth root base. How to select the front, how to keep taper. Bonsai trunks are expensive, so sometimes it's best just to grow your own. If you have a piece of land or a backyard with a bit of space, you can just plant your seedlings or cuttings in the garden and then grow them out to create nice thick bonsai trunks. So whenever I have cuttings or seedlings, I try to plant them up in a pot or in a grower's field. And some of them just end up here in the garden at my place. There's a Japanese maple growing here, corkbark elm, a field maple, there's a big linden tree growing here. Let's take this little whip. This is probably 2 years from a cutting. And I'll show you how I prepare it to go in the ground for long-term growing. What you can see here is there's a big root. Basically this is the former taproot. I had already pruned it once, I think, here at the bottom, but another root took over. And here on the side is another root that has taken control over the root ball. So I'm going to take the biggest ones and shorten them to stumps. So effectively what we now have left is a fairly nice and flat root ball, but there's a number of roots here right on top of each other. So I'm going to just snip the top 2 of this tree away. So now there's only one left. Because it now has quite a few roots lost, it's not going to be all that stable. I'm not going to stake it, so I'm just going to clip this off. And then I use this as a trick to get the Nebari to stay nice and flat and thin. I put a piece of shell, but you can of course use a tile or a piece of wood or whatever you want underneath it. So I make a shallow hollow, maybe 1 or 2 inches deep. Here I make it 2 because summers are hot. Put the shell on the ground, add a little bit of soil on top. Then I take the tree and I'm going to plant it on here. And as said, I want some roots to be a little bit to the side, and I move this to the side, add soil on top so it stays in place, even these out that they're not in the same angle, even out. This is a bit of a wishing game because I plant this up and in 2 years time, when I lift this again to look at the roots, only then will I know what it looks like. Now let's take a look at another tree that I've done this before with. Hidden between all the foliage and the linden tree and the Trident Maple here I have a Pyracantha. This was a €1, $1 tree seedling cutting 4 years ago, and I've been letting it grow. I've been letting it grow too much. Look at this. This whip is all from a cutting about that size. So it needs to come down, and Pyracantha is a very strong plant. First cut done. This is going to be the top of the tree, and everything else is basically just sacrifice branches. So I can take all these longer things off here. That's it. The roots, as shown before, there was a piece of slate below, just like I do with many of them. But there's a very big root here on the side. There's a high root here. Let's get some more soil off. But the bottom of the root ball is very flat. So what I'm going to do now, prune back the big root. Don't want that. Prune back this big root. Prune back all these long roots. This one is too high up. And then just bring it back to a nice condensed root ball. I know this is counterproductive to growth, so I only do this every 2, maybe 3 years. But this is the way that I develop a flat root ball on seedlings over time. This is turning out to be a nice tree, slowly. This can still go a bit shorter. But I should really do this in summer with the concave pruner. Prune these all the way back to the trunk. Now I'm leaving a stub for the trunk not to die back further. This I'll leave on. This could be another sacrifice in the back. But look at this nice taper that's starting to develop. If this is gone and this is gone, we have a very nicely tapered tree. Planting holes ready. Piece of slate in the hole. Take the tree. Decide which side I want to grow strongest. I want this as a sacrifice to grow strongest. So this is going to be on the sunny side. This is going to be on the shaded side because this I want to keep small. Plant it here. Then just make sure that you straighten out the roots to the outside. That they do not now twist around each other because that will ruin the Nebari in the long term. Plant it up. Now this linden tree here has a very different story, of course. This was grown as a tree, left to grow for a couple of years, got a very thick trunk. Then I picked it up, dug it up, cut it back and planted it in my growing field. Now there's a nice start of a broom, and I think actually that in summer I'll just cut out this stump, let that heal, and maybe then put it in a pot to develop as a nice clump style. I don't want these to get overly heavy. I always leave a little bit of stump to dry in, and I look for buds that go to the outside when I prune. To avoid overly thick roots developing, I like to lift all these trees every few years. When lifting these plants, I always want to look for roots that are growing much bigger than the rest of them. So I tap off all the old soil. This is a very, very thick root here, and there's nice smaller roots developing. There's a root here going all the way down. This can go. I don't want downward growing roots on a bonsai. Then I look at this thick root, and the thick root cannot actually be reduced because it is an integral part of the trunk line. So later on when I'm planting it up, I'll have to find a better spot. This is actually not a good example of a nice bonsai because it was grown too big with one major root before I planted it up. So it's going to take a lot of time for this side to catch up. I am going to remove the downward growing roots a little bit. Upward growing roots are also not very useful. Take those off. Downward growing roots, not very useful. Roots on the inside, not very useful. So only leave the roots that are growing out to the sides and nothing going down or up. I like to put a little bit of soil on it so they don't sit straight away on this piece of seal. And in this case I'm going to make sure that the thick roots sits quite far from the edge. And ready for the rest of the season. This larch and this linden tree are exactly the same age. They were both planted in this field, I would say 8 years ago, maybe 9. And this one I've been pruning back every single year. I just take all the branches, clip them all off, and I just let one branch run a little bit and then cut it back. You can see here the stump. This one, however, I have let big branches grow out from the top. Now one of the downsides, you can see that here, is the risk of the top not healing properly. This will take a couple of years to close. You don't get that if you cut back all the branches every single year. If you trim back larch every single year, one thing that you ensure is that there's buds on the inside. Larch can get very, very dense, and if you don't cut it back, then the inner buds will die. And if the inner buds die, then you will not get buds back on the inside. Larch is terrible at back budding, so you need to stimulate it to really create buds on the inside. It also means the trunk doesn't thicken as much as it could when you would just let everything go. Now this year I'm going to remove part of the top, but I'm going to leave this little branch here, which will create the new top. Sometimes I take out longer and thicker branches like this one. I have to be honest with you, this linden tree is actually a mistake from my side. I was planning on letting this grow segment after segment, just growing out the top, cutting it back, growing out the top, and trying to get as few scars as possible. Then I decided that the base of the trunk was actually getting the same thickness as the top of the trunk. So I decided 2 years ago to let this branch grow out. Yes, this is only 2 years old. And well, you can see the result. There's a very, very big fat branch now here at the base. The trunk itself has not thickened all that much. But if I cut this off, it's going to be a huge scar. So what happened, I removed a very big branch here low on the trunk. I cut it off, and instead of it healing, it died back almost all the way to the roots. So this is now all dead. Here in the top of the tree, there's also a dead section. There's a dead section here. And look, this is how wet it was. There's worms growing all the way into the tree. Back in the soil with you. Now what I'm going to do with this tree, it's going to be some sort of a fairy tale bonsai. So let me just prune this back. Like I would normally. I'm just going to trim it back to buds that are pointing outward as before. I'm leaving a few of the longer ones longer. But most of the side ones, the heavy ones, I'm removing. So this is now nicely pruned back, ready to go for another season. And as soon as this starts to fill out more, I'm going to lift it and put it in a pot. So now I have a choice. I can cut the branch off, develop this further and sit with big scars here. Or I can decide I'm going to cut it off here and develop this as the main tree. And later cut it off there. Now if I look around the tree trunk, there is a third option that's not obvious for you. This branch I could remove. Then I have this young whip here that could take over the whole trunk. Look, if I take this off, now this is gone, you have a good view from the front of the tree in the future, potentially. So I could remove the big branch now and not have any scarring on the front. This will heal over within a year. This will close down. And later in the season, I could cut it off here. Once this has developed strength. This, of course, is a very, very strong whip. Takes a lot of energy from the roots down below. If I now prune it back all the way to the trunk, there's a big risk of the trunk dying back all the way to the ground. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to reduce it. I'm going to leave a few branches. My loppers are not all that strong. Oh, it's very soft wood. Like that. Prune these back. This is enough to keep the branch here alive until summer. And in summer, when this is full of leaves, then I can prune this back further. I'm going to do the same thing here because I'm going to cut this off all the way, but not now. So this Trident Maple has been in the ground for quite a few years now. It might be 8 or 9 years. And what you can tell is that I have had a sacrifice branch here. I had a sacrifice branch here that I need to this summer cut back. And I'm growing a new top from this one. So this is also a sacrifice that I'm going to remove later on. I don't have any sacrifice branches on this side of the trunk. The reason for it is, this way I don't have any scars on the front of the trunk, which gives me a nice smooth bark, and everything else is in the background. So far, I've been throwing away all the branches that I've cut off, except for the one from the elm that I was going to take as a cutting. But of course, sacrifice branches can also be air layered off. This is a Zelkova. I want to make a Zelkova broom, so I put an air layer on this late summer, and it was too late. The roots had not formed. I'm leaving it on over winter, and in spring I hope it will root. Many of these, this is Zelkova, will root from cuttings when taken in late winter. Let's try that. I'm going to take long whip cuttings. And the same for this elm. I'll take 2 cuttings out of it. A long straight one. And one that's nice and curved. Don't really need cuttings, but if they root, who knows, I might give them away in my channel. Would you like one? Drop a line in the comments. We trimmed back some trees, we removed the sacrifice branch, we lifted the tree and showed how you can work on the Nebari in the middle of winter and how you create a nice smooth root base. What else did we do? I showed you why sacrifice branches are not always a waste of time. And yeah, how to select the front, how to keep taper. I think we're all done. If you miss anything, drop me a line in the comments. If you don't miss anything, drop me a line in the comments. See you next time. This is Jelle, growing bonsai. Keep doing that.